In this video, I want to talk to leaders about getting a vision for creating a discipleship culture in your church. Years ago, I visited a church in Manila in the Philippines, and I saw this incredible thing. It was this picture of a church where everyone was making disciples. They weren't just talking about it. They weren't just coming to church listening to sermons. Everyone was making disciples. Now, what we were witnessing, we didn't realize this at the time, but what we were witnessing was a discipleship culture. And we got a vision for what a church could look like with that kind of a culture. In this video, I want to help you to see that that is really the vision that Jesus has for your church or your ministry today. Here's the thing, many churches today are broken. Now, that doesn't mean they're terrible. That doesn't mean the pastors or leaders are bad. It just means that we're not doing what Jesus intended for us to do all along. Most of our churches have what I call a preaching culture, mine included. We preach sermons, people come, and they come back the next week to hear our next sermon. The problem is, this isn't what Jesus had in mind. In fact, in Matthew chapter 9, Jesus had been preaching to the masses, to the crowds, and here's what he says at the end of that chapter. It says, when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers. Now, when I read that passage, I am really convicted because I think, wait a second. If Jesus' sermons weren't enough to satisfy him that ministry had been done well enough, then how can I think that my sermons are good enough? In other words, Jesus knew that as good of a sermon as he preached, or as you might be able to preach, sermons don't disciple people. People need shepherds. If they're really going to pursue God, people need shepherds, or people need disciples to walk alongside them and help them to follow God. Now, this picture of the biblical church is described in more detail in Ephesians chapter 4. That's where Paul says this. He says, and God gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and the teachers. Think of those people as the paid staff at your church or ministry. And he did it to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for building up the body of Christ. Now, I encourage you to go read that passage. In fact, read the entire passage for yourself, and you'll see that the strategy that Paul is giving us for the church is very clear. Here it is. Pastors equip, people do the ministry. But that's probably not how your church or ministry works. The paid staff members, they're the ones who are the ministers. They're the ones who are out there doing all of the ministry. And then the people then are just consumers. They're coming week in, week out, to listen to a sermon. Maybe they're going to invite a friend to come and listen along. But really, we're not getting any traction. And we're not really the picture of the church that Jesus had in mind or that Paul had in mind. See, here's the thing. The early church was started by simple disciple makers. Think about it. The first followers of Jesus weren't the highly educated or the socially positioned or the religious elite of Jesus' day. Jesus went to regular dudes, regular fishermen, and he gave them a task from day one. It says in Matthew 4, he said to the fishermen, follow me, and I will make you fishers of men. And immediately they left their nets and followed him. Jesus called regular guys to follow him, and then he sent them out after a few years. He sent them out to start his church. And the church that they started was a church of disciple makers. Go back and read the first few chapters of Acts. Regular people, everyone went out. They didn't have paid staff members. They didn't have clergy, anything like that. Regular people went out and made disciples. And the reason for that is because there was a discipleship culture. Culture means everyone was doing it. It was normative. If you were a Christian, you recognize that it was your responsibility to go make disciples. That is not how the church is today. Now, here's the question, and you can use this question and the other questions below to talk about this with a mentor or your leadership team. Does your ministry have a discipleship culture like Jesus envisioned?